Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to the channel. We are doing Bell Talk episode number 5, and this is an exciting one because this one I've been waiting quite a while to do just because I've been trying to acquire enough bells to really show you guys the differences in some of this stuff. So, if you tell from the size, we're talking about the 4 bell. There's a lot of confusion amongst other collectors and in some of the community about certain 4 bells and 4As. Even I had a lot of confusion about some of this stuff when I first started. So we're going to kind of go through all these different bells and talk about some differences and their applications. And these all are a combination of 4s and 4As. Raised letter ones over here, non-raised letter over there. So we'll just kind of jump right into it. And so from left to right, I have oldest to newest. So we're starting early 80s with these two, 90s, early 2000s, and then mid 2000s, like 2005, 2006 for these. And then over here we have 2007 era bells up to 2018-ish, 2017, 2018, somewhere around there. So what gets a lot of people is that some of these bells are stamped with an A, some aren't, but the bore depths are exactly the same. Now, why is that? Well, the bore that you guys are seeing here, we'll use this one. This is a 90s 4A. You guys can see it's got the A stamped on it. It's a 90s bell. It's got a big inlet compared to the much smaller early 2000s inlet. So yeah, this bore depth here is going to be exactly the same as this one. And you guys can see that this is just a standard 4 bell. Now, big question is, why do these both have the exact same bore depth? One's a 4A, one's a 4. Why did they do that? Well, the official term for that bore is called a half-step bore. It's what they started off using as an A bell, and then as time went on, they instead of having a different bore depth for a 4 bell, for a standard 4 bell, they made this usable for both. So that's why modern day K5LAs sound much different from earlier K5LAs, along with the depth difference in the 2 bell. You guys can go way back in my videos. I know I did a bell talk on 2 bells, and I do cover different bores in the 2 bells. So yeah, so this is referred to as the half-step bore. I'm gonna do my best to get some measurements for you guys. It's a little tricky doing it one-handed here and trying to get something correct. So while these measurements may not be 100% correct, they're going to be close enough. So double check that, make sure we're kind of straight. Sorry about that, guys. I'm not going to do this on every bell because this will just take a lifetime. So there's your rough measurement, I'll call it, for what a half-step bore is, depth-wise, from the top of the nozzle to the bottom of the tuning pocket, as it's called, or the bore. So that's going to be your average measurement for a half step bore. That will vary, but not much. Depending on what factory fabricated the bell, how much wear there is from the nozzle, because you do measure nozzle, top of the nozzle down. So there's going to be little differences, but not enough to make these bells sound different. They're going to play the same hertz. I do apologize. I do not know the hertz on anything. Basically, I don't have any hertz measuring tools, and I don't really have a way to do that, so I do not know the hertz offhand. I'd have to ask and see who else knows. I know there's other people in the horn community that do know the hertz very well. I do not, so I do apologize for that. So now, what came before the half step bore? Well, before the half step bore, there was no bore. So this is early 80s, what's called a true 4 or a straight 4. This bell plays a higher pitch than that, clearly. And like I said, I'm not going to do this with every bell, but I'll try and get you guys somewhat of a reading here. Just that you know just how shallow the depth is. That's probably a little off. It's probably going to be a little off. It's hard to get it straight up and down. But there's your rough measurement for what a straight 4 or true 4. Basically the same bore depth as like a early 1, 2, standard 3 or a straight 3. Pretty much the same bore depth. And you guys can see no A. Of course, because this is even before they made A bells, or I should say started stamping them with A's. You guys can see it's a raised circle. It's got that older grinding pattern on it. Large inlet, early 80s, true or straight 4. So these would have been also on earlier sandcast horns. That would have been your bore depth. I know that there is some sandcast A bells out there, but those were tuned. So now this, early 80s. Got your raised circle. But now we can see that we have a half step bore. And you guys can see the machining on it is very rough. Basically like a lathe turned tuning. Not like a cutting bit or a milling bit. And then we go to the side and you see that there's no A on this. Now, something that might confuse you is that's basically the exact same thing as this. It's a half step bore, 4, no A stamped. The difference is the age. Big difference in the age. So we have like a 2005, 2006 bell compared to an early 80s bell. This bell was produced before they started actually stamping the A's in the side. So this is technically an A bell, but it's also technically not an A bell. So that's where stuff can start to get confusing. This is just an early 80s bell. Now there are 80s 4 bells. Normally those would all be in the true or straight bore. You don't really see any 4 bells that were meant to be 4 bells that were like this, unless if they were tuned or if they were later 80s bells. God, I don't even, that I'm not sure of. I'll have to look into that because I'm pretty sure they kept the true 4s going into the early 2000s, because I have a bell that used to be a true 4 and it had been tuned, but it started as a true 4, and you could tell it was the same bore depth as this before it was tuned. So I know these bells were carried quite a ways up. I think just into the very early 2000s. After that, then they started to change. But I know I've seen 80s 4 bells that were a half step bore, but they were much later. So I think there was a transition period when they were probably doing both. Not 100% certain on that, but that's just my own speculation on that situation. So pretty much as far as A bells and not A bells go, the half step bore stuck around for a really long time. It was widely used on K5LAs, K5Ls, early K5HLs. They had all throughout the years of K5LAs and later K5Ls. Earlier K5Ls would have the true 4. That's why they kind of have a better tone. The half step bore kind of lowered that and didn't really give it that true K5L sound or K5H sound. So that's kind of that. This is an early 2000s. This bell, you guys can see it's stamped. This bell covers anything up from like 2001 up to 2004, pretty much. Not much change in a 4A bell in that time period. And then here, this is a 40 something K bell, so this would be between 2005 2006. No A stamped. So and this kind of began the official this is where, well, I shouldn't say official. This is where you can see the crossover from a non-raised letter 4 to a raised letter 4, standard 4. They kept the exact same half step bore, and I'll show you that in a minute. So here's our mid 2000s 4 bell. Now this is where we saw the very first change in the boring of a 4A. So here's a 4A. This is same era between 2004 2005. And you guys can visually see that the 4A is deeper than the 4. This is the first time that we actually started to see 4As that were bored deeper to lower the note. That's when I guess somebody actually started caring about the sound of the horns again, and started tinkering with lowering the note to playing an A chord. And just as a side-by-side, we'll do a measurement here. So we'll just kind of get a measurement on that. Sorry for the camera work. So pretty much what I read on the 90s bell, on the 90s 4A, that's what your rough measurement is for bore depth on the 40K standard 4. And then we'll measure the A bell. Oh, I'm stuck. And then there is your rough measurement of the A bell. Now you guys can see from the measurements, definitely different, definitely deeper. It's not just a visual effect, it is physically a deeper bore now. So then this kind of set the bracket for the very first raised letter 4As, and I'll show you that next. So we'll kind of keep these two queued up because now we're kind of getting into the newer string of bells. So here I have both of these are very first run, very first production raised letter standard 4 and raised letter 4A. These would have been early 50K series horns, the horns that they were originally on. And you guys can see, from those of you that know what raised letter bells look like on the inside, these do not look like, these don't look like raised letter bells on the inside. They do not have a radius cut from the bore into the throat. There's no fancy inner or outer bevels cut on the nozzles yet. This is how you can tell very first production raised letter bells, because they look exactly like non-raised letter bells on the inside, but in fact they are a raised letter bell. And this is a standard 4, standard raised letter 4, very first produced standard raised letter 4. And you guys can see if I can get this lined up here. So we have the predecessors and the next step up from that. And you guys can see bore depths are the same. This is still a half step bore. So technically, if you wanted to build a raised letter K5LA hybrid that has the sound of an older K5LA, you could use any raised letter standard 4, and it'll sound like the earlier 4As. And then also combine that with a shallow bore too. Like I said, go back to my other episode if you're wondering about the two bells. So here you guys can see both of these are the same bore depth, and just for you guys, I'll measure this one down, and I'm stuck again. So you guys can see that's right about on par for what the non-raised letter 4A was. As a rough measurement. So now we enter into the whole new realm of raised letter bells. So we have our, what used to be a versatile half step bore is now solely considered a standard 4 bell. Even in the mid 2000s range, that was the new standard for a standard 4. And then we had our new standard for the 4A, which finally had a little bit deeper tone. And just to show you guys, this is a 4A. So now let's go a few years in the future, because there was the next step up from this hasn't changed from what they did to now. So here are basically modern day standard 4 and 4As. Now we lay down here and we can see that a modern day 4A is a little bit deeper than this. This never really got a official name put on it, like the half step bore. I call these the mid bore, trademarked, JK. But that's basically my thing for them, because they're not a half step. They're a little bit deeper, but they're not as deep as a modern day 4A. So I call these the mid bores. So now, you guys remember what the measurement on these were. So now we'll get a measurement on this one, and you guys will be able to see it is even deeper. That's pretty close. So there you guys can see we are yet even deeper on the 4As. That is the last tuning. Second run raised letter 4As were bored this depth. That's why I did not try to get every era of bells, because there's times when there's just no change. The very first run is the only time that you're going to have a difference in the bore depth between a 4A and a modern day or a second, third, fourth run. Whatever run it is, it's going to be the same bore depth as this, as long as it's not a first run. And then we can compare some of the visual differences between these guys. You guys can see we start to have a beveled cut. Boy, if my camera would focus, that'd be nice. Really sorry for the shoddy camera work here, guys. My phone is just not wanting to focus on this. But you guys can see there's a beveled edge around the outer on the nozzle. This first run RL bell, there is not. Like I said, it resembles a early 2000s non-raised letter bell pretty much to the T. Other than that, not a lot of differences. We do also have a little bit more of a beveled cut on the outer ring. These ones don't have them. The radius cut from the base of the tuning pocket into the throat of the bell. First run does not have that, just like older bells. It's pretty much just a straight cut. And then we have the raised letter standard 4. No A stamped in it anywhere. Whoops. You guys can see pretty much the same deal. We start to have a beveled cut on the outside of the nozzle ring. We start to have the radius cut into the throat. So that's basic differences. Second run raised letter stuff also didn't have a big round radius like this. Some of the stuff started to get a little bit of just a quick diagonal cut, but it wasn't till third run is when we started to see this kind of really big radius cut into the throat. So there's just kind of some differences between very first run raised letter and anything newer, which I do cover in other videos on Bell Talks. So we'll just kind of measure. It's probably going to be a little off, but it should be close. So that's what we got for our standard 4. Let me retake that. I want to make sure I got this somewhat correct, so that way your information is not too terribly off. Alright, so not perfect, but there's your rough measurement of what the first run raised letter is. It's basically, even if it's a few ticks off there, still gonna play pretty much the same tone that those play, the same chord. And then the raised letter one. Or the newer raised letter one, I should say. So there, we're a little deeper, not enough to make any bit of like a pitch difference or anything like that, change the hertz, nothing like that. They're all roughly the same. Like I said, between different manufacturers, not different manufacturers, just different locations that these were made in, wear on the nozzle, machining patterns are different, so you're going to get a little bit different readings between all of them, but they're all pretty much the same. If there is a difference, it's not enough to make a change that you're actually going to hear. So So yeah, basically we'll kind of get back to the half step bore. The half step bore was widely used. That's why it got really confusing, because they were basically pawning that bore off as an A and a straight 4 or a standard 4. They did not want to spend a bunch of money in tuning these bells down and then still producing the true 4s, but they wanted to lower the pitch of these to get closer to an A bell, or closer to an A chord, I should say. So the half step bore lasted a really long time. That's why there's a lot of confusion. It confused me the first time I saw it, because so my first encounter with actually seeing the half step bore used on different bells was, I had a early 2000s K5LA. So it had half step bore, had the stamped A in the side. It was just your regular run-of-the-mill early 2000s 4A. Nothing fancy. Well, then I had got a K5HL, raised letter K5HL, and I was looking at this 4 bell, and I'm like, well, hey, why is that the same bore depth as that? That's kind of confusing. There's nothing visually that's really going to make them play a different pitch from each other, so why is that? So I kind of, I was confused on that for quite a while, until I finally talked to somebody and figured out the whole half-step bore deal. And this does confuse a lot of people. I've helped some people try and figure it out. It's hard to explain just in words. You guys actually, it helps people to actually see the visuals of all these bells and see why there's different depths, why there's the same depths on different bells, why does one bell have an A stamped on it, one bell doesn't. Pretty much, when they started mass producing a half-step 4 bell, the only thing that was costing them extra time was whether or not they wanted to stamp an A on it. If it was going for a K3LA, a K3HA, a K5HA, a K5LA. If it was going on an A horn, it was going to get a stamp on it. If it was going on a K5H, a K5L, a K3H, a K3L, and then later on the early K5HLs, they just didn't have to stamp it at all. They just produced the bell, bored it, shipped it off, done. So they didn't have to really think that hard about what, like, not like back in the old days when they actually started producing a 4A or a tuned 4, and then still had the true 4 out. Then they actually had to pick and choose what they wanted for what. This was just a very easy, very cost-effective way for them to hammer horns out pretty quick and not have to think too much about it. So that's why, basically that's why the half-step bore was covered on so many eras and used on so many different horns, just because it was super easy for them just to give it a stamp or not give it a stamp was their only options. So and then once we started to get a little later, like I said, somebody out there finally started to care about the tuning of the horns again, started to lower 40K. Anything 40K and up is when you're going to see a difference between 40 and 50K. If you have a 40K K5LA or K3LA or whatever, if it's an A bell or an A horn, and you look at the 4, it's going to be deeper. Because this particular bell is off of a 40K horn, pretty low 40K horn, and this was a big find for me because I knew later stuff was kind of this mid bore, but I didn't know how early they started it. Pretty much as soon as they hit the 40K series of horns, they started to bore the 4As a little bit deeper. This 4A, that's the same bore depth, but it's a raised letter bell. This was on This would have been used on early raised letter K5 LLAs and early K5 LAs. This particular bell came off of my first run K5 LLA. It's all first run bells. Took a lot of time to build that horn to find first run RL bells because pretty much first run RL was produced for such a short time. Not many horns saw the actual production of this before they finally started changing all their casts over to their second run and third run. And second run raised letter even had a couple variations within that run. So you're more likely to find second run stuff. First run stuff is really hard to find. Kind of that lower 50K range. And then, yeah, like I said, the internals, you get pretty much the exact same visual of a non-raised letter bell, which is pretty cool. So yeah, guys, hopefully, I know this was kind of a long-winded video, did a lot of talking. Hopefully you guys can see what I explained in the video pretty good. Hopefully, if some of you have these half-step bores, that kind of ends some of the confusion for you. If you have further questions on like a true 4 or like a non-stamped 4A or anything like that, feel free to send any questions in the comments. I will gladly answer them if I am able to. Some stuff I know, some stuff I don't. Some stuff is a little cloudy still, even knowing everything I know. But this is the best information that I can give you guys as far as why the half-step bore became a thing, why it was used on two different bells, why it was used on A-horns and not A-horns, some of the differences in manufacturing all the way up to a modern day. And if anyone is wondering why after the first run, why did they go even deeper, they did their own science in the hertz and the pitch and the chord and all that, and they found that boring it even deeper got it to a true A chord. So that's why anything after first run is going to be what you see nowadays as far as the depth goes. Side note, 3As never changed. I have a 3A that came off of the horn that this is off of. It's an unstamped